Imagine a small Universal comedy which slipped into a few hundred theaters with almost no marketing behind it. The studio had nearly thrown it away.
There are movies that come and go, and then there are movies that quietly rewire the entire industry around them. Fast Times at Ridgemont High belongs to the second category. Released on August 13, 1982 by Universal Pictures, it arrived in a handful of theaters with next to no promotional push, carrying the weight of a studio that had already convinced itself it had a dud on its hands. What followed was the opposite of a dud. The film earned $27 million against a production budget of $4.5 million, launched multiple careers that would go on to define American cinema, and eventually earned a permanent home in the Library of Congress. Behind all of that, hidden underneath the sun-bleached hair and checkerboard sneakers, is a collection of stories that most fans, even devoted ones, have never fully heard. Here are 26 of them. The entire foundation of Fast Times at Ridgemont High rests on an act of sustained deception. Cameron Crowe, then a staff writer for Rolling Stone magazine, spent the better part of a school year enrolled undercover at Claremont High School in San Diego, California. He was 22 years old and posing as a teenager. The principal knew, as did a small number of faculty members, but the vast majority of the student body had no idea they were sharing their hallways with a professional journalist. Over those 9 months, Crowe gathered material that he shaped into a 1981 nonfiction book. Universal Pictures had already optioned the property before the book was even published, buying the story on the strength of what Crowe had assembled in his notebooks alone. When Crowe eventually wrote the screenplay, he removed himself entirely from the narrative, choosing instead to build the story around 6 major characters drawn from the real students he had observed. Before Amy Heckerling ever entered the picture, Universal executives had set their sights on a filmmaker whose entire sensibility was the polar opposite of a sun-soaked mall comedy. David Lynch, already known for the unsettling surrealism that would define his career, was formally invited to the studio for a meeting. According to Cameron Crowe, who was present, Lynch arrived, sat down, read the material, and came back for a follow-up conversation. He was polite and even warm about the whole thing, but he made it clear the project simply wasn't the kind of story he wanted to tell. Then he got into his white Volkswagen Beetle and drove away. Lynch's involvement never went further than those 2 meetings. The what if is staggering to consider, a Lynch-directed version of the pool house scene, or the Spicoli and Mr. Hand confrontations, filtered through the sensibility that would later produce Blue Velvet. Nobody will ever see that version, which may be exactly why it continues to fascinate. The cast most audiences know almost didn't come together the way it did. A remarkable number of future stars were considered for roles that ended up going to other people. Matthew Broderick, Eric Stoltz, Ralph Macchio, and others were in the mix during the casting process for various parts. Meg Tilly, Michelle Pfeiffer, Elizabeth Shue, Rosanna Arquette, Kelly Preston, and Ali Sheedy were among the actresses considered for roles that ultimately went to the young women in the finished film. Fred Gwynne, best known as Herman Munster, was offered the role of Mr. Hand and turned it down because he objected to the script's content involving teenage sex and drug use. The role eventually went to Ray Walston, who made the character one of the most memorable teachers in film history. Each of these near misses would have produced a fundamentally different movie. Scan the credits of Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and you will find the name Nicholas Coppola, not Cage. The actor was 17 years old at the time, the nephew of director Francis Ford Coppola, and he had lied about his age in an attempt to land a more substantial role. When the producers discovered he was only 17, labor laws restricted how long he could work each day, and he was given a small background part as one of Brad's friends at the burger restaurant. Cage later told The Hollywood Reporter that the experience of working on the film under the Coppola name was genuinely uncomfortable. Other actors on the production, whose names he chose not to reveal publicly, were dismissive of him because of his famous uncle. The sting of that treatment was significant enough that almost immediately after wrapping, he selected a new professional surname. He took the last name Cage, reportedly drawing it from comic book character Luke Cage and avant-garde composer John Cage, and rebuilt his entire career without leaning on the family connection. Amy Heckerling was 27 years old and had directed exactly one film of any length when Universal handed her Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And that film was a thesis short she had completed as a student at the American Film Institute. She had no agent and no professional track record. Several established male directors had already declined the project by the time it landed in her hands. Rather than simply shoot the script she was given, Heckerling went back to Crow's sourcebook and rebuilt the screenplay from the ground up in collaboration with him, deliberately elevating the Ridgemont Mall from a backdrop into something closer to the film's beating heart. Her stated goal was to make the film feel less like a structured comedy with jokes and setups, and more like life simply unfolding, in the same way that American Graffiti had a decade earlier. That instinct shaped every decision she made. The ensemble Heckerling and casting director Don Phillips put together reads, today, like a roster of people the industry hadn't caught up with yet. Forrest Whitaker, in one of his earliest roles, plays Charles Jefferson, the star football player. Anthony Edwards, years before his fame on ER, appears in a supporting part. Eric Stoltz, who had auditioned for Spicoli, wound up with a smaller role in the final film. Pamela Springsteen, sister of Bruce Springsteen, can be spotted as a cheerleader during the pep rally sequence. The sheer concentration of talent that hadn't broken yet, assembled in a single-teen comedy that the studio was already embarrassed by, is one of the more remarkable accidents in the history of casting. Sean Penn's total commitment to Jeff Spicoli is not something that has been exaggerated in the retelling. According to producer Art Linson, Penn arrived on the first day of filming wearing the full beach ensemble he had assembled himself, sun-thrashed wig, checkerboard bands, the complete costume, and he never dropped the character for the entire length of the shoot. The door on his dressing room was labeled Spicoli, rather than his own name. He would not answer to Sean. He would not answer to Penn. He channeled a specific childhood friend from Malibu to build the voice, the posture, and the rhythms of how Spicoli moved through the world. And he held that construction from the first day of principal photography, which began on November 2nd, 1981, through the last. According to Cameron Crowe, the only moment Penn stepped out of the character was on the final day of shooting, when he presented Crowe, Heckerling, and Linson each with a ceremonial shoe and formally introduced himself. My name is Sean. Penn's method approach went beyond simply staying in character between takes. According to accounts from the production, he actively improvised during scenes in ways specifically designed to catch his co-stars and the extras off guard, producing genuine reactions he could play off of. Ray Walston, who played Mr. Hand with the authority of a seasoned character actor with decades of experience, was genuinely annoyed by Penn's behavior on multiple occasions, not performing annoyance, but actually feeling it. That friction between a veteran actor legitimately irritated and a young method actor fully inhabiting a disruptive teenager generated some of the most electrically alive moments in the finished film. There was no simulation involved. The tension was real, and it showed. The footwear Penn chose for Spicoli was not a wardrobe department decision. He selected the checkerboard slip-on Vans himself as part of the character's physical identity, and the shoes became one of the most recognizable elements of the film. Their appearance in the movie sparked a trend that significantly boosted Vans' profile with younger consumers at the time. For a company that had been operating primarily in the skateboarding and surf communities of Southern California, the exposure from a widely seen studio film introduced the shoes to audiences far beyond that regional base. It was an entirely unintentional marketing outcome. Nobody on the production planned for it, and it came directly from one actor's personal instinct about what his character would put on his feet in the morning. Several of the film's central characters were drawn from real individuals Crowe had known or observed during his undercover year. The character of Mark Ratner was modeled directly on a student at Claremont High School named Andy Rathbone. That same Andy Rathbone went on to become enormously successful as the author behind the famous For Dummies series of computer how-to books. Mike Damone, the smooth-talking ticket scalper with an opinion on everything, also had a real-world basis in Crowe's research. Spicoli, by contrast, was not assembled from a single person. Crowe built him from several surfer types he had observed during his time at the school, and Penn then layered in an additional specific influence from his own Malibu upbringing. As for the two young women at the center of the story, Stacy and Linda, Crowe has consistently refused, across more than 4 decades, to identify who they were based on, protecting their privacy long after the fictional versions of them became famous. The Sherman Oaks Galleria, where a significant portion of the film takes place, was a functioning commercial business that could not shut down for a movie production. To solve the problem, the crew filmed there entirely after hours, from approximately 9:30 in the evening when the mall closed, through to 9 o'clock in the morning before the first shoppers arrived. They worked those hours every night they needed the location, rather than fight the mall's existing fluorescent lighting by setting up their own rigs, which would have consumed hours of their limited window. The crew built custom lighting designed to replicate and blend with the mall's natural glow. They also redressed the location partway through the shoot, replacing the back-to-school displays with Christmas decorations to reflect the passage of time in the story's calendar. All of this labor was in service of making the finished film feel effortless and lived in, exactly the illusion it creates. To prepare for the role of Stacy Hamilton, Jennifer Jason Leigh did something that went beyond conventional research. For approximately 3 weeks before filming began, she took actual shifts at the Perry's Pizza counter inside the Sherman Oaks Galleria, the same fast food environment her character inhabits for much of the story. She learned the physical reality of the work, the register, the rhythm of the counter, the regulars, the specific quality of the boredom. She also went inward, pulling out her own high school diaries and letters and reading back through them, mining her teenage self for the uncertainty and longing that defined Stacy's experience. This level of preparation for what the marketing would eventually frame as throwaway teen entertainment is visible in every scene she appears in. Leigh gave Stacy a specific interior life that the genre typically didn't bother providing. The bathroom fantasy sequence, one of the film's most rewound and parodied scenes, came at a personal cost to the actor at its center. Judge Reinhold has spoken candidly for years about how genuinely embarrassing he found the filming of Brad's fantasy about Linda. Part of what makes Phoebe Cates' startled reaction so convincing is that a significant portion of it was authentic. For the scene, Reinhold brought a large prop to the set without informing his co-stars or the rest of the crew. When